Awesome. All right, Judah. Hey, man, thanks for joining me again today. I really appreciate it. We're
Appreciate the opportunity, my friend.
yeah, we're back a week later. Just kind of want to get an update with you and see what's happening on your end. Like, I mean, just kind of jump in and start with like rents. Like, what's happening on the property management side? What are you seeing on your rent collection and things like that?
So our rent collection is actually really good. Are we track. So we have 4,000 units that we manage
Right.
across 4 states
Okay.
and some major metropolitan markets like Allentown, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Trenton, Harrisburg, Central PA, Baltimore, and Virginia Beach, Virginia. So, a pretty broad base there. And we track our rent collection to the day. Like, how much rent did we collect by the first? How much rent did we collect by the second? And that way we can just look at all that data.
Yeah.
And we always like to say that we're a tech company that operates in the real estate world.
Yeah.
And so data and data mining is just super important to us, like being able to have our own empirical data. Anyway, the point is, typically by this point in the month, we've collected 80% of the rent that we expect to collect.
Yep.
And with right now, for this month, April 2020, we have collected 75% of the rent that we would have collected. So lower, meaningfully lower, but really still in that same range. And I credit that to a bunch of things. Number one, just being a good property management company up front. This isn't just a plug for Slate House Group. It's more a plug for being a good, honest, decent business person the whole way around.
Yep.
And that way, when you need to have those meaningful relationships with tenants, you already have them.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, we're a pretty strict property management company usually. We don't go willy-nilly on a bunch of rules and guidelines and things like that. The rules are the rules, and we expect you to follow them. We clearly communicate them up front. And people respect that, and we also have good relationships with people, and because of that, we've developed good relationships, and now we can reach out to people and say, hey, we don't normally work on payment plans, but what can you pay?
Mm-hmm.
And eviction courts are closed right now, but that's not going to be the case forever, Mr. Tenant, who's a little bit behind. What can you afford to pay? You're getting $600 a month or a week in unemployment. Okay, great. Typically a third of your budget is spent on rent. Can we get 200 of that just so that you're not $3,000 behind and July is here and all of a sudden, you're expected to be caught up tomorrow. Like, let's work together to make this work. And people have been very responsive to that because we have a pre-existing good relationship with our tenants.
So I got to, you said something when you just started talking that I don't want to glaze over here. So you said 75% of the rents, or usually at this point in the month, you've got 80% of the rents you expect to collect.
Correct. That takes out vacancy. You know what I mean? Any property manager,
Okay.
for good and bad reasons, has 10% of their properties usually are vacant. So
No,
not
I'm
collected,
not
not at 75% of gross potential rent. We're at 75% of what we would expect to collect.
okay. All right. So that was my question. It's like, I know that when I had a management company, there was a certain handful of properties that like the owner didn't want to evict,
Right.
but the tenant wasn't paying. We didn't expect them. They might as well be vacant. In fact, they were worse than vacant. So I wasn't sure if that number had changed because of some of the impact of the virus or anything like that.
Right. So 75% of the rent that we would expect to collect. And, we have a lot of, we inherit other people's properties, right? And other people's problems. So nobody calls me because what they have is working. Nobody, either they've run their properties into their ground or their spouse has, or their existing property management company has run their portfolio into the ground. So I always say I need a couple of things when I take over a property. I need tenant name, tenant contact information, lease, and keys. If somebody gives me 20 units, I rarely get all of that. I mean, if somebody gives me 3 units, I rarely get all of that. They're like, Sally lives in unit 3. I don't know what her last name is. She
Yeah.
mostly works with text, and I think she owes me about $400.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that's very, you know, multiply that times however many units somebody has, and that's what I have. So the first thing I always have to do is clean up that mess, tell people they're paying me rent and everything like that. So and then also somebody will say I have 5 properties, but like 3 of them are vacant.
Yeah.
And like the only way that happens is just gross mismanagement. Not necessarily maliciousness, but sometimes people are better at buying properties and rehabbing properties than they are actually managing properties. So
Yes.
and I think, you know, this isn't necessarily current crisis related, but like I think that that's really smart for most investors to recognize.
Mhm.
Are you good at painting? Well, then don't try to paint. Hire somebody else to do that. Are you good at bookkeeping? Well,
Yeah.
then great. Don't do
Push
that.
the
Hire
limit.
somebody else to do it. I'll
Yeah.
never forget the time that I was talking to somebody who had just hired a bookkeeper for the first time. And the bookkeeper said, my fees are $150 a month. And it looks to me like for the past 8 months, you've averaged $85 a month in NSF fees or extra bank charges and things like that. So my fees aren't actually $85. My fees aren't $150 a month. They're that difference between the
Right.
two.
Exactly. It's 65.
Plus your time, plus I'm going to be increasing your credit score and all these things. And so when people hire me as a property manager, I say I'm probably going to do 80% as good as you could. I'm probably going to do way more than that, but to soften the blow, I tell them I'll do 80%. I'm going to do 80% as good as you could do, but I'm going to give you back 95% of your time.
Right.
And also at a time like this where people are working from home and people are trying to work from home and homeschool their kids and also stressed out about their own job, if you have 20 units and 20 tenants to communicate with who are very needy right now,
Yeah.
that's a problem. Well, we've had amazing results with our tenants, with our owners, because we've been able to very proactively call people, reach out to people, touch base with people. And I can't tell you how many owners I've had reach out to me and say, I have a question about this, that, or the other thing. But before I get to that, you guys have been awesome with communication.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to brag on Slate House Group. I'm saying that's the type of business owner I've always wanted to be.
Yeah.
That's the type of entrepreneur I've always wanted to be. Solve problems for people, build positive relationships so that when the S hits the fan, you're already there. I'll let you ask your next question here in just a second. Sorry, I'm on a soapbox, but my grandfather was chief of police in Lancaster City for a long time. And then because of that experience, he got into the security consulting business and stuff like that. And he was a chief of security for a large national company. It was like a Fortune 200 company or something like that. And they have a lot of factories and stuff like that. And there was a factory where they were having problems. And he was like, guys, I've been telling you for 2 years, we need to build a fence around this factory. And he said something that he meant in security terms, but I've taken it as life lesson. He said, the time to build a fence is before you need a fence. The time to have a savings account is before you need a savings account. The time to develop good, positive working relationships with people, in this case, tenants, is before you need a positive working relationship with people.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot there. There's a lot there to tease out. I got a bunch of questions and a bunch of comments here.
Sorry.
So no, it's cool. It's cool. I'm gonna, you know what? I want to talk about evictions and kind of where that's going. But before we get there, like it's people always panic, right? Everybody
Right.
panics, and that panic is it usually takes the form one of 3 forms: either fight or flight, right?
Right.
Or making friends. If
Right.
you can cut that whole part of the equation out, knowing and planning for not even the hard times, but the normal stuff. I mean, you and I both know that every month there's going to be tenants that have financial issues. If you have a large enough portfolio of properties you're managing, you're always
Right.
going to have that conversation. So you know what it's going to look like going in. If you plan for it ahead of time, it's an easy conversation. But if you're banking on that rent coming in to pay your mortgage, that's a really tough spot to be in as an investor.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you don't want that the income doesn't matter, but if you don't have those cash reserves, it makes the whole conversation a heck of a lot more difficult. You end up bringing a lot more emotion to the table, and now you want to fight. They either want to run or fight back, and it's not a good situation all the way around. So to that point, you have any crazy tenants giving you a finger over the phone, or any craziness?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, but that's, and we aggressively screen our tenants. We do a 4-step screening process. We do a criminal background check, a credit check, a landlord tenant check, and an income verification. We verify that they make at least 3 times in income, whatever the monthly rent is. Okay, that's for free. Everyone can steal those ideas on your own, and put them to practice. But I mean, have you ever been 6 months into a relationship with somebody and been like, oh my goodness, this guy's crazy? Well, that's just how people are. I mean, we've all had dating relationships and maybe marriages that have gone sideways. So, it's the same way with people. And, sometimes stress brings out the worst in people. There's a Christian band called Jars of Clay, and that's a reference to a Bible verse. And listen, I'm not going to get all preachy here, but like we as people are jars of clay. When a jar of clay is stressed, it breaks, and whatever's on the inside comes out. You find out what's on the inside when things go negative. And can you rise to the occasion and stay positive and stay, okay, how is this going to be? How is this an opportunity? How can I made a Facebook post today about this and just said, we're having empathy for people, and our tenants really see that. And we're not calling up the tenant and saying, Mr. Tenant, I would like to empathize with you. It doesn't work like that. You can't fake empathy. It's got to come from a real place of genuineness. And when you genuinely empathize with people, you can then have the real conversation with people that say, listen, you and I both know that in maybe 2 months, maybe 6 months, this is going to be behind us. And we are going to be able to start evicting people again. And you don't want to be in a situation like that. And you also don't want the landlord to lose this property in foreclosure and then have the bank as, the person. Obviously, their margin is really tight on this. So what can we do to make this work? And, that's just critically important. I will say this. You said about, planning for the worst. Listen, I like a lot of the big national gurus. I know a lot of them personally, but I think that they do a disservice in order to sell books, tapes, and seminars, and they make property management and real estate investing sound easy. And even during the good times, I have people calling me who they buy a single family home and it pro formas out to their cash flow net is going to be $200 a month. And they're like, Judah, for the last 3 months, I've been averaging $185. Why is that? It's like, well, first of all, $200 is pro forma, right? Like, this isn't like where people have to understand that, like, the only thing guaranteed is your job. Like, your job says, I'll pay you $18 an hour, and this is then what your paycheck is going to be like. Owning rental property is not like that. There's stuff that comes and goes. And if you do an $85,000 rehab to a 100-year-old house, or even a 60-year-old house, guess what? Even after you replace everything in it and do a massive rehab, it's still an 80-year-old house, and there's still, problems that can happen.
And you know what? And on a pro forma, you got an $85,000 rehab, and all of a sudden you open up the wall and you realize that you got termite damage, and you got to replace 3 beams,
Right.
and all the floors on the second floor have to be ripped out. Now all of a sudden that's $95,000, and it changes the whole dynamic of the investment. But you know what?
Right.
It is what it is. We look at projections and we live in the real world. And then you have stuff like this COVID-19 that shows up, and all the rules go out the window. So what for
all
those
the rules go out the window.
Exactly. where do you think when do you think we get back to work? Because that's the stuff that I'm looking at right now and trying to figure out. As I see a lot of the well, yesterday I was reading a couple articles about some of the death rates for this disease and comparing them to, historic death rates for
Right.
the flu and for, heart disease and pneumonia and all that stuff. And there seems to be some correlation there. It's almost like anybody that dies of any cause with that has the virus in their system is being attributed to a death from the virus, when in reality maybe those death rates aren't nearly as high because we've got plummeting mortality rates for the common flu and for heart disease and pneumonia and all these things that in the past we would have said, oh, they died of pneumonia. Now it's a COVID-19 death. So I mean, maybe this isn't such a catastrophe, and that's kind of a positive outlook on this thing, even though we've got these high rates of infection. I don't know if I had a question in there, but what's your take on where we're at? And
Yeah, I got to tell you, well, yeah, I kind of agree. I think we have to be careful sometimes with that, especially on a recorded webinar, because it not that you are, but even unfortunately, sometimes people even referencing that comes across as unsensitive to what's going on. And if we were in a private conversation, I would say I completely agree and understand with you. So, and I think that there's some fluffing up of some numbers, let's put it that way, because there's some people who have a vested interest in maybe this going on a little bit longer. And I also think, listen, Josh, you're an entrepreneur. It's our job to display leadership. And part of leadership is listening to my attorney, but knowing that my attorney is always going to tell me no and always point out the ways that everything can go bad. And I
yeah,
think that sometimes the infectious disease people, they're kind of come at this from the same perspective. And the infectious disease people would like us to never leave our houses and
sure.
always wear masks. And, the best thing we can always do is this. Well, that's not necessarily practical. And I do agree with a lot of the steps that they've taken and a lot of things that they've done. Oh, there you are back again. You're in a blank
Did I
screen there
lose
for
you?
a while.
Sorry about that.
So I think I don't see this going on for much longer than past the end of April. And kind of like we talked about last month or last week, I've seen more people figuring out how to operate and do business in this new normal.
Yeah,
So I also think that there's going to be restaurants that decide to open, consequences be damned. And I think that once one does, they're all going to. And I think that, you're going to see a dam break kind of there. And, people talk about the damage to the economy that we saw last time. Well, we have to remember that the damage, people lost their jobs because of the damage, because of the economic, like it was the opposite is what I'm trying to say of what we're seeing now. You know what I mean? Like we
right.
shut down the economy and that's causing economic problems. Last time there was economic problems and that shut down the economy. So
Yeah,
I mean, I was sitting and talking to somebody just today, Josh, like, I don't know about you, but like I need 3 pair of shoes and 1 or 2 shirts and 2 or 3 pair of khakis. Like
yeah,
I'm going to go out and revenge shop. I also know that one of the pastimes that I have, one of the things that I like to do is go skydiving. I mean, I've been cooped up. Like I can't wait to go skydiving. And I'm going to skydive more in the month that this, opens up than I have, a lot before that. Like think about the people who want to be out playing golf right now.
sure.
As soon as they can go play golf, they're going to go play a lot of golf. I think we're going to see a pretty quick recovery. And if I had to guess, I would say that that's going to happen around the end of April, beginning of May.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this, like
I
the opening back up, the opening back up of things is going to happen end of April, beginning of May.
One thing I noticed at the beginning of this week, I feel like the tone of a lot of the things that you see on social media changed. You know, we went from a lot of people rallying and saying, okay, how can we do this virtually? How can we live our lives virtually and sequestered and quarantined? And, you know, the beginning of this week, I started noticing it's like, I mean, I feel it myself. Um, it's like people are just like, I've had enough of this. How much
Right.
longer do I have to stay in my stinking house? And you
Right.
know, it's frustrating. It really is. You know, you love your family, but man, it's nice to get a little break. It's like it's nice to get some room. Or you know, my wife said to me the other day, she gets, you know, if we were single and you know, quarantined by herself, this would suck. This would be the worst case
Right.
scenario. And you know, here I am complaining that you know my kids want to go out and play. Like I like that.
Right.
It's great. You know what I
Right.
mean? But it's
My favorite meme so far from all this has been two ladies standing in the kitchen, and the one says, "I thought you said your husband was in the backyard," and the other woman says, "Yeah, you just have to dig a little deeper."
yeah, yeah.
I don't think we're going to see a baby boom on the other end of this. I think we're going to see a divorce boom on the other end of this. And I say
Bro,
that as somebody who loves the institution of marriage. Don't get me wrong, my friend. Yeah, my grandmother, when my grandfather retired, my grandmother said, "I said till death do us part. I just didn't know that that included lunch." So I
yeah,
think that there's going to be a lot of people just saying, "Okay, I'm done with this. Let's move on. Let's get past this. Great. I'm gonna wear a mask in public. I'm gonna wash my hands. I'm still gonna be super safe, but like I'm ready to get back to work." And I think that that's just because of where we are as Americans. We had a strong economy before this. This isn't a Great Depression.
hmm
Listen to me on this, Josh. This isn't a Great Depression. This isn't a Great Recession. This is a Great Suppression. And once the suppression stops, and I don't say that as negatively, you know, that we're being oppressed by the government or anything like that. I'm just saying there are unnatural forces at play here, and people are going to be ready to move again. So I'm very optimistic about how tenants are responding. I'm very optimistic about how landlords are responding.
yeah.
It's hilarious to me how many people are trying to drive wedges, and I see posts on Facebook that are cut and paste and obviously straw man, obviously made up, obviously fake stuff, and trying to make it sound like landlords are big greedy meanies, and that's just not been my experience with most landlords and most real estate investors. And I think that if we stay positive and keep moving forward, we're going to see some really good stuff on the other end of this.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're coming to the end here, but to leave on a positive note, you know, the one upside that we have going on right now is that this is happening all over the world. It's
Right.
not as if it's just the U.S. economy and everybody else is roaring and doing great. You know, I think this is going to turn into a huge amount of growth when we're on the other side of this and things get back to some sort of normal. I think, like you said, like people are going to be rushing down to go have a drink at you know, at a restaurant or go out to dinner or, you know, just be around other people. And you know, I think people are a little bit more. They're just realizing how much they appreciate the presence of other people. You know, and
Right.
being sequestered. Like, who knew? I thought I was a curmudgeon. Turns out I actually like people. You know,
Right.
great.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. Let's end this sooner rather than later so people don't see that it goes on for too long and decide not to watch it. But I think that we should do this again, and I think we should make this a regular habit, my friend. I love chatting with you, and I think that we can add a local voice of reason and sanity to the conversation and let people know what we're thinking.
I love it. So we'll get on here again tomorrow. Join us again if you're interested in on our take on the market and life in general. All right, I'll see you tomorrow, Judah. Thanks, man.
See you, my friend.
Take care.